Welcome to the Minuteman Classroom, a series where we take a classroom-style approach to the basics so you have more time to spend in the field training with like-minded individuals from your community. This content is primarily inspired by Marine Corps doctrine and secondarily by Army doctrine, but may have been modified by the narrator in a way that they think best serves the tactical citizen and the modern Minuteman in order to set them up for success. None of this content is new or special, but is simply a rundown of the basics to get everyone on the same page. My name is Jeremy and I will be your instructor for today. My background is primarily in the Marine Corps and Fire Service, first as a field radio operator, then in the Embassy Security Program in the Marine Corps, and now I'm out and I am a full-time firefighter, paramedic, and the owner of Everyday Citizens Tactical, which is a perfect segue to what our topic is for the day, which is static security operations. Static security operations definitely have a big play with the modern Minuteman kind of theory and, where you might actually find yourself actually conducting operations. It is not likely that you are going to be conducting raids and assaults and clearing objectives and doing a bunch of, high-speed, infantry-ish style skills. There's a very good chance that you actually just find yourself doing static security operations, whether that be for, a homestead, it may be for, a church being used as like a donation center during a disaster. Maybe you have really good relations with your community and your EMA, and you're doing security for a hospital because things have just gotten that bad. The reality is that as sexy as it may be, we're probably not doing a lot of really heavy dynamic infantry stuff. But static security operations is absolutely something that we could all find ourselves possibly doing. And some people already do this with like their church security details or anything else that may fall into that realm. It may not be as high pro as some of this content may be, but the principles of all of it, still apply. This image you see here is of a MSG, a Marine Security Guard, doing rooftop security at an embassy. Like I said before, my background towards the tail end of my Marine Corps career was in the MSG program, and then kind of wrapped up with MSAL, the Marine Security Augmentation Unit. So this is a little bit more of my wheelhouse from the Marine Corps, and definitely something that I've carried over to the civilian side just with everything else I've done as well. So let's dive in. So as an overview, static security operations are performed for fixed locations that provide strategic support for operations or stores aid and resources for the local populace and personnel that an adversary may look to attack. You can really play just about any card you want as to why or where you are conducting static security operations, but anytime you have a fixed position, regardless of what it is for, there is some level of security operations that have to take place, and there's a ton of different layers to that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But some of the big topics we're going to talk about today is identifying threats, creating a security plan, clearing and securing property, medical considerations, detainment procedures, and then directing and handling civilians and bystanders. That last part really can drive home for just about probably anybody listening, as any type of active shooter situation where you employ your CCW, anything like that, being able to direct and kind of wrangle the chaos that is those types of emergency scenarios is going to be huge, because civilians will absolutely lose their mind. I can tell you, both from the embassy side and just working with State Department personnel, now to the fire side, when there's any type of emergency, if things are very serious, people get very emotional, very worked up. There's a lapse in their judgments. They may freeze. It can get a little out of hand, and we'll talk about that towards the tail end. So the first thing is identifying threats. And the threat assessment process is an ongoing task that continues to update, which drives adjustments to your security plan and posture. More than likely, if you're a part of any type of more formal organization, whether it is police or military, or you are on like the community defense Minuteman side, you probably have some sort of SOP in place that details how you're actually going to create your security plan and some internal SOPs that kind of dictate how things go. But as a general overview, there's a few steps that every good security plan entails. And the first one is assess the target and its vulnerabilities. The target being the location that you are doing the static security for. For a lot of this today, I'm going to use a hospital as an example. A hospital is, a common place that is a very easy target for potential bad actors that lacks a lot of strong security parameters. And just to create some consistency for examples throughout this, we're going to talk about a hospital a lot. So the target is whatever place you are actually doing security operations for, and its vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities can mean a great number of things. We're going to talk about that throughout all of this, but it is, lack of exterior barriers, entries and exits that may outnumber the amount of security personnel or mitigation techniques you might be able to take. The vulnerabilities are very, very variable, I guess I should say, depending on what type of, facility or structure or compound you may be doing the security operations for. Identify adversaries' capabilities and likely course of action. This part will vary a lot. If we're talking about some sort of jihadi terrorists, we know just through history that, VBID style attacks on, compound style facilities is very popular. If you're fighting a more conventional adversary, you may expect a little bit more of an organized and dynamic assault from some sort of ground forces. It really is going to depend. But the biggest thing that you need to drive home, and this is going to be very important to co-work with your intelligence shop on this kind of stuff, is the likely course of action. This should be big and bold, and everybody knows it within the threat assessment. This is what we expect likely adversaries to most likely do against us. And then the next thing you need to do is to take steps to mitigate those vulnerabilities. If you say, hey, VBID style attacks are very probable, then I need to create some sort of hard barrier, diversion, stop tactics, anything like that on roadways that are leading up to, say, the front entrance of our building, or common areas that people gather in, whatever it might be. And then continuously reassess for vulnerabilities and threats. If you do security operations long enough, the quote-unquote enemy or potential bad guys that are looking to do damage and harm to you and the facility, they're going to adjust their likely course of action as well to adjust for this. So you need to continuously reassess everything that goes on, which leads us to this next part. What type of vulnerabilities you may need to mitigate is heavily dictated by the type of property you are trying to protect. A facility used for regular civilian traffic poses a different level of vulnerabilities versus a defined security outpost with hard walls. It is going to be two completely different security plans if I compare, say, a standard civilian hospital to a military forward operation base that has large parapet walls and gates and a lot more security at their disposal, versus a hospital that basically is just surrounded by a giant open parking lot and has multiple ways in and out and does not have definitive hard points to defend. So some common vulnerabilities that we're going to see is the perimeter of the exterior, and it may be a lack of hard barriers. Just like I said with that previous example with the hospital, you may not have a big wall or a big fence or anything like that that is going to kind of give you that exterior level of security where you can mitigate actual personnel doing a job. Some facilities are not going to be set up for that. Vehicle entry exit points, vehicle barriers may not be common. It may very well just be a SUV parked, at a 45-degree angle on the road and a guy out there checking IDs. You may not have, actual, anti-VBID measures and proper gates and all of that kind of stuff. Aerial threats is a big one. Drones have absolutely changed the way we look at the sky. They've changed the game as a whole. They're very cheap, very, very user-friendly. I mean, just about any adversary, until we see a major break in the logistics chain on the commercial market, can utilize drones to, target static facilities. We can use the most recent incident in Russia from the Ukrainian intelligence operations. They were able to get trucks worth of drones deep inside Russia and then target strategic airfields. And those airfields did not have the anti-drone measures in place that were able to prevent this style of attack. And you can't prevent everything all of the time, but it's something that has to be considered. The building interior, certain building types are an endless maze. There were some embassies that I served at where the inside was what we just called cubicle city, and almost every floor was just a giant maze of cubicles and office rooms, and it would take forever to clear the embassy because there's just so many hidden spots and you just don't have enough personnel. Some places are going to be like this. If, especially if you're working with some sort of civilian counterparts, NGOs, stuff like this where they're doing some sort of like aid and humanitarian style stuff, and you're just the security element involved with all of this, you can best believe that, office style settings are somewhere in your future. Big warehouses also pose, a big issue. Lots of, in-depth large shelves and, closet spaces, and the warehouse is all broken up into different types of rooms. The interior drives a lot of your security plan. And then high-rise buildings provides for enemy observation and targeting. Obviously, in a perfect world, we want to not surround ourselves by buildings that are tall enough to see over top of any type of exterior perimeter we may have, or just generally speaking, not give the enemy good, clear line of sight to do any type of observation against us. But that's not always going to be the case. Cities, you can't just, it's not like Legos where you can just take everything apart and put it back together in the order that you want. Cities being urban and suburban areas, they are built the way that they are, and there's really not any moving that around. So sometimes you're just going to be, stuck with the cards that you are dealt. So next, we're creating a security plan. The security plans are initially created to mitigate the vulnerabilities identified in the threat assessment and are regularly updated. Like I said earlier, the enemy is also going to update, their likely course of action and their plan and their observation schedules and all of this kind of stuff. And your security plan needs to, mirror that. Security posture should vary and never remain constant. If your presence is maxed out all of the time, then an adversary will find new vulnerabilities with no way for you to mitigate. You may hear the military talk about threat levels or threat postures, and this could be very true at the same thing down to, the security plan level for one simple fixed facility or fixed site. A security posture should consistently change, and it should be random. There may be two guys out at the vehicle checkpoint today at the front of the facility, and they're just wearing like duty belts. And then 2 days from now, there's actually four guys out. They're running 2 lanes, and they're still in duty belts. Well, then the next day, there's 3 guys out there. They're all in full kit. Things should vary. Rotations with roving patrols and stuff like that. That kind of stuff should vary. Maybe even your uniform and your level of kit changes. It's a very popular technique amongst certain organizations and the operations that they take place where, you may only have 15 security personnel for this site. But, one day you're going to wear camouflage uniforms, or one team's wearing camouflage uniforms and one team's wearing civilian attire, or, one team is wearing duty belt style stuff and one team's in full kit, and they're all just changing throughout the day. Keeping things random will really help kind of throw off not only the adversary's ability to figure out what your security plan is, but also how many security personnel you might actually have. Unless they just have really good cameras and pictures of everybody's faces, they may say, hey, we've got 30 people in camis here, and then we have at least 30 to 40 more that are wearing general civilian attire. In reality, you have 15, 20 guys there, but everybody just keeps changing their kit and their uniform so often that they can't actually get a, good notch down on how many people are actually there. The plan put in place will be heavily dictated by the position's purpose. Places like logistical facilities, hospitals, etc., are not built out as hard targets, nor do staff members like to see an overwhelming security presence around the clock. This was very true on the embassy side. The majority of embassies in the world are not built out as hard targets. They are built out to be, pretty and inviting and diplomatic, and there's architecture and all of this kind of stuff. Whereas security personnel, we would often be like, why is this here? This provides, a potential adversary that jumps the wall, a great place to hide, or, this and that and so on and so forth. There's just some things you can't mitigate, as well as the whole part about staff members may not want to see a heavy security presence all of the time. Again, if you're doing some sort of armed security for a local hospital, the ER is not going to want to see you just walking through the halls, in full kit all day long. They want to see you maybe outside checking IDs, coming up the road to the hospital, or maybe on the roof or something if there's that type of a threat presence. But they're not going to be like, oh, it's just Joe, Tim, and Johnny. They're just doing their roving patrol through the ER today in full kit with 16-inch rifles and so on and so forth. So you're definitely going to have to make some breaks in your security plan that you may not agree with, and you may think that it's a bit of a risk, but you've got to be able to make all sides of the house happy when we're talking about this kind of stuff. So some security mitigation techniques is vehicle checkpoints, hard and soft. This kind of, again, goes back to, hey, two guys in duty belts. Hey, just, can I see your ID? To, hey, we've got a few guys out here at the gate today. They're all in full kit. We're running mirror checks underneath vehicles. We've got the dog out, like whatever it might be. That's a big threat posture adjustment thing, because it's one of the first things that people notice, either when they're observing the facility or they're trying to enter a facility, is, what does the, posture look like at the vehicle entrance to the facility or compound. Roving security is a big one, both internally and exteriorly to any type of buildings. Even adversaries that may be doing observation on the facility, if they've got some sort of high point and they see 2 to 4 man teams doing roving exterior security, that's something that they're going to note and be like, well, they've already got, ground elements out there that are ready to respond if something happens. So now we've got to mitigate our way around that. Overwatch and static security, again, not something that should be consistent. Some static, like hard security positions are going to be manned 24/7. That's the reality of things. But maybe not all of them need to be up 24/7. Maybe we don't need people on the roof 24/7. Maybe they're out there for 2 hours, and then in another 2 hours, you're going to go back out for 2 hours, but then they're going to come inside, and they're going to be inside for 4 hours. And then they're going to go back out, and now they're out there for 6 hours straight. Just like whatever it is. It can be really random. Cameras are a big thing. Obviously, they make up, places that security personnel cannot be at all times. These are really big on vehicle entry points, utility entry points that like service personnel or maintenance personnel may utilize, common areas, common walkways outside of an exterior, just things that can help somebody who's in some sort of a security post that may be watching all of these cameras and kind of be that center for all of the comms. They can kind of get a grasp of what's going on. Signals intelligence sources is also a really big one. You might be able to pick up on some adversarial radio use around your facility, during observation or, pre-assault style operations, or maybe you can tell when drones have gone up in the air and you're like, we're not supposed to, we told the public, no drones around here, but I look at my SDR and I've got a drone on blah, 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 frequency. Drone patrols yourself, you may be the ones utilizing drones, and it may be where you're doing drone patrols just outside of the compound wall or the facility walls, and you're looking at that exterior kind of side of things. And then local information sources. This is really big, and it was huge in Iraq and Afghanistan, for all of our military service members over there, is that you make friends with the local populace, and they sneak you little pieces of information, so on and so forth. But you have to, and the same could be true here. But you got to be careful with this, because you don't want to put, potential local sources in danger if adversaries may look to harm them for working with you. You may also want to be careful with who you give information to. You may be standing a security checkpoint right outside the front gate, and that 65-year-old Betty walks her little Shih Tzu dog down the street in front of your facility every single day, sometime right around after 8 a.m. And every single day she stops, she says, oh, hi, boys. Oh, you guys are so handsome, blah, blah, blah. And she's talking to you guys, and she's like, oh, what are you guys up to today? And you just slowly start giving her little bits of information. And she's like, oh, how long they got you out here today? Oh, we're out here till 12, and then, we'll get relieved and we're going to go eat chow and all that. Oh, okay, well, have a nice day, boys. And then she continues her walk, and she goes back and gives all that information to her granddaughter that's a part of some sort of adversarial group or insurgency cell in the area. And now they know, what to expect for the rest of the day. So just be cautious about what kind of information you get out, even if it is just some sweet old lady. So clearing and securing property. This is absolutely something that even the military is not great about unless they are dedicated security style personnel. Police are going to be very good at this kind of stuff, at least hopefully. Security room clearing and assault clearing will normally take place at different tempos, use different equipment, and hold a different mindset. A big thing that was very hard for the infantry Marines when they went through MSOL school in the MSG program was they usually failed room clearing. There's a week-long program during your indoc. You go and you do room clearing, and they would be kind of chaotic, kind of all over the place. They're not really able to focus and slow down on, a more organized approach to room clearing. They just did what they do in the infantry, which is flood a room with PFCs and lance corporals and yell a bunch of things and shoot everything that walks. Like, the whole approach to offensive and assault style clearing is completely different from the security clearing side. How fast you may be moving, how you communicate, the considerations, the equipment. Obviously, if I am doing a, security operation for some sort of logistical compound, it has 4 or 5 buildings on it and it's being run and maintained by our personnel, I'm probably not just chucking frags into rooms before clearing them because there's a bad guy that got on the compound. Even the use of flashbangs and different type of bangers may be limited by whoever your command element is, just based on who also may be working with you guys, so on and so forth. I'm not using door charges to get into places, at least not unless it's a crazy scenario. Security clearing must more carefully consider property damage, civilian bystanders, and threat precedents. Kind of what I just hit on right there. We don't want to go blowing up or destroying our own facility. And then time-dependent clearing versus detail-dependent clearing is also 2 different sides of the conversation. If you've never been to any style of a room clearing class or a force-on-force class, basically what this means is, am I clearing knowing that I have limited time, or I'm doing what may be referred to as a hasty clearing because, time is of the essence. I know that there's a bad guy in here. I can hear him shooting all the way over there. And I want to get to the threat in the shortest amount of time possible. Or am I doing a more detailed clearing operation? Meaning that I don't know where the threat is. It doesn't sound like there's anything violent currently going on, but we know there is somebody in here and he's hiding, and we have to find him. So we have to open up every nook and cranny and so on and so forth. This is something that you'll dive into much more in a more, organized room clearing style training or program. But just know that these are things you have to consider as a part of the security team that may be doing types of clearing. And then utilize anchor or clock techniques when securing exterior grounds. This part usually gets pretty messy for folks that don't have a system in place for doing so. And for this, we have a very nice image for us to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. So this is our, compound that we are doing security for. This thick black line is our exterior wall. This blue line is our vehicle checkpoints, and we have some concertina wire and everything set up. Vehicles come in and so on and so forth. This is how our vehicles are getting processed. And then we have all of our buildings with our security post here in the center. This is where kind of like that, command and control is kind of set up. There's a guy always on duty. There's cameras, so on and so forth. So something happens. A V-bid struck the wall, blew a hole in it. Some guys ran in. Some folks jumped the wall. Maybe a local that works in this facility turned on you, whatever it might be. And, we have to start clearing the inside of these buildings, but we also have to clear the exterior. And we may not be able to do that very efficiently based on the limitation of, personnel, security forces, whatever it might be, because it's not like I can just stand in the middle of this compound and walk outside and just go, yep, looks clear to me. People can hide behind buildings, hide in trash cans, dumpsters, underneath cars, all different types of stuff. So what do I need to do? What is the clock or the anchor method? Essentially what this means is that once I have the exterior secured, and I know nobody's coming and going anymore, I now need to go through and clear all of these buildings, regardless if I know I have the threat or not yet. If I knew that at least 2 guys jumped the wall and made it in here and 2 guys have been detained, I may not know if there was actually a third that I missed. So this needs to be cleared thoroughly. So what we're going to do is the exterior secure, and we're going to put a team in place at any random location. We're starting up here by the vehicle checkpoints, just as a frame of reference. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a 360 around this entire compound and clear all of the buildings in a methodical manner. So the anchor team is here at the top of the clock, and the clearing team starts going through. They go through the barracks, cleared the barracks cleared. And then they come down across the yard. Now they're in the motor pool. Motor pool's clear, and they go all the way around. Essentially what we're trying to do is the clearing team is trying to push any bad guys, intruders, infiltrators, anything like that, to a point to where they'll either be between the anchor team or the clearing team. That way they're not just running all over the place, and we're just constantly playing a game of Scooby-Doo. This is very popular amongst, medium to small size facilities that have a lot of different buildings and hiding points and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, if there is a middle point that's not like a security post of some sort, you'll need to set maybe a secondary anchor team. Putting guys up on roofs of buildings that have been cleared could be good because they can see guys, leave areas or run to different buildings. If my clearing team is going into the motor pool and I got guys up on the barracks roof now and a guy runs out the other side of the motor pool and he's running towards the admin building. Well, now they can call that out and we have a frame of reference of where bad guys might be. So, the anchor or clock clearing method is really popular for exterior clearing operations. Medical considerations: any form of security operations takes place over treating casualties, with the exception for defined medical personnel. The first rule of March, guys, is always that the gunfight comes first. But establishing hasty casualty collection points, otherwise known as CCPs, they need to be clearly marked and then communicate with command or other security elements that hey, we had, a handful of casualties over here at XYZ building. Medical's all the way across the yard, so we set up a CCP in the front office, and we'll move guys from there. Awesome. Treatment starting there. We'll have some aid and litter teams run guys back and forth to the designated medical building or medical bay or to, whatever type of medical transport needs to take place. And then consider staging medical equipment throughout the grounds for easier access to higher capabilities. Doing something like keeping a AED and a trauma duffel bag in every single building can be extremely beneficial. If these are places that are already owned and operated by some sort of civilian organization, there's probably already safety rules in place that they needed to follow, and there's probably at least some boo-boo stuff and some AEDs and stuff like that in the workplace. But, plussing stuff up, if the resources allow, is not a horrible idea. Detainment procedures. All operations should have a detailed plan on how to handle detainees, starting with a SOP on detainment techniques and then how to process detainees. Utilizing acronyms like STRESS, which is search, tag, report, evacuate, segregate, and safeguard, will do a good job at kind of steering you in the right direction. If you are going to be responsible for doing some sort of security operations, it's probably a good idea that you have some level of combatives training under your belt and you've walked your guys through how to actually put guys into flexi cuffs and how to move them once they're already in flexi cuffs or anything like that. Identify the primary contact and cover within a fire team and a fire team or squad for handling detainees during operations. If you have a squad size element that is clearing and that first fire team is the assault element or the clearing element, you may say, hey, you and you are my contact and cover. Cops know this very well. Contact is the person who actually speaks to, the bad guys or bystanders that we may come across. And then the cover is somebody who is offset to their contact guy, and they're basically looking out for their safety while they're doing their work. Give clear and exact commands when detaining. If you're telling one guy to put his hands up and your partner next to you is yelling, get down on the ground, it's going to be very confusing for the guy you're trying to detain to accurately follow commands. And normally they're going to get frustrated and then they're going to start to not comply. This is a big issue cops kind of run into at times. Safety first, always. Do not put yourself into a situation that you think may hurt yourself or your partner if it's unnecessary. If you have a guy that needs to be detained, you have them at gunpoint, and there's just two of you, and the guy you're looking to detain is just a big dude. Hold him there at gunpoint and call for some help and be like, hey, we got a guy over here we need to detain. I need extra hands. And wait to get an extra 3 or 4 guys in that room. That way it's, you're able to do so in a much safer manner. And then civilian considerations, which brings us into our next slide. Directing and handling bystanders. So suburban and urban areas have a greater risk of civilian and bystanders being involved or around conflict areas. And then, like I said earlier, if you're doing static security operations for some sort of humanitarian organization or hospital or just anything like that, where it's people other than combatives in the area, well, you're going to need to consider interacting with them. You need to give clear commands and directions. Again, if you yell, put your hands up, and your other partner yells, get down, it's going to be very confusing for people who are very emotionally stressed and kind of wired out at the moment. Identify yourself and identify them. So you may be getting ready to enter a room, or you just entered a room, and you state that you are security forces. Everybody in the room come out, or whatever it is. Make sure you identify yourself, because if there's bystanders or something in the room and they hear, oh, security forces, come on out, guys. They may, they're probably going to comply or believe you, hopefully, and it avoids any type of mishaps of you having to go in there and deal with people who aren't necessarily non-compliant, but just are emotionally immensely stressed. And then identify them. If you can't identify them, they may need to be partially detained, temporarily detained. Now, this does not say that everybody that's temporarily detained is a bad guy. There may be a new guy working at the facility in the logistics department. We'll call him Jared. And, Jared has only been working there 3 days. The security personnel that are regularly there aren't familiar with him, and he's not familiar with the security personnel. And Jared was in the bathroom when, there was an active shooter situation or something, and his ID is at his desk. And now you've got Jared, who you don't know, from logistics, who works there, but he doesn't seem like a threat. So you're like, hey, Jared, you're going to be temporarily detained, or you don't even need to detain him. Just say, hey, Jared, I want you to go sit in that corner for a second until we can figure this out. Not everybody is definitively a good guy or a bad guy. There are people in the middle that you have to figure it out, and we have to remember to remain human and civil while doing this. Do the civilians or workers or anything like that have a plan for this facility for any type of disaster? Whenever you're doing security operations for a facility or a compound or a place of any sort, there should be SOPs that says, when this occurs, this is what happens. So let's take active shooter. The facility SOP says active shooter takes place. The security team does XYZ. The bystanders are expected to, hide in place. And if, bad guy makes it in there, then they fight, or whatever it might be. So what is their plan? And then expect them to panic or freeze. Like I said, those that are not trained in this, exposed to this, that are not used to this, they very much so will have a bit of a mental breakdown. Not everybody is prepared to deal with this kind of stuff. So you just have to know that they're not necessarily resisting, or they're not, non-compliant. They're just in a panic. Pre-planning. This is so big. A lot of people don't take this kind of stuff seriously that aren't on the security side of the house. It's a struggle for every cop and embassy security guard and regional security officer and everything everywhere all of the time. Because other departments that are working in the area, they don't really care about your security sideshow. They just want to get along with their day and do the job that they are trying to do. So really driving home the pre-planning and safety side of things, and maybe even doing exercises, is going to be very important. If you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section down below. Again, I'm not the all-knowing, knowledge figurehead for everything, but, I think this covered a very good amount of basics and big picture topics for static security operations. And like I said earlier, if you were on the community defense side, the Minuteman side, Again, you're not going to be doing, sexy assaults and all this kind of stuff that you may think that you may be doing. There's a very good chance that you're just going to be doing static security operations at some warehouse where water and food and medical supplies is being held out in some sort of very dangerous disaster. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video, guys. Until next time, train hard, train often.